You are listening to the fourth segment of the four-part series, Tom Campbell at SkyBlue Symposia. In this segment, Tom discusses broader social structures and relationships, our interactions and perceptions of economics, the human social tendency to increase entropy, broad evolution and the process fractal, and problems and attitudes. Welcome back to part 4 of SkyBlue Symposia Speaking with Tom Campbell. Tom, in the Ultimate Social Network video that you had produced, you spoke of a number of themes. My questions will primarily draw from that video, since much social and psychological energy is directed these days towards social events, actions, discussion, etc. One of those things that you spoke about was in regard to flawed schemes that are preventing a more utopian social structure from evolving. Granted, they all have common root problems of flawed people or social structures, with motives and intent that are flowing from ego, greed, or jealousy. Can you talk about the pseudo-capitalist system that is prevalent today and how we can evolve beyond it when the dysfunctional power structure and systemic control is so tightly interwoven into what it is?
Okay, well, Dave, you asked really hard questions. This is a good question. You know, when you write down when you make a book and you call it The Theory of Everything, I was hoping that other people would come and say, well, here's how it applies to economics, and here's how it applies to relationship, and here's how it applies to, psychology, and etc. But it didn't happen. So here I am now, mystical physicist out talking about social structures and economic structures and relationships and that sort of thing. Because if you do have a big understanding that really understands how things work, then you should have something intelligent to say about everything. So that's kind of what we're doing here is going out and touching some of these other things like economics and politics, and where does, where does my big toe fit into these things, and what does it say about how they work? And your question was real easy until you got to the very last part that said when the power structure and systemic control is so tightly interwoven. And of course, that put another whole slant on it. But in general, what we create collectively is an honest reflection of what we are. The us versus them problem cannot be blamed really on them. Their behavior is a symptom of the disease, just as our behavior is. The basic disease driving all the dysfunction is, of course, a low-quality consciousness. Trying to fix symptoms never works. The only way that I see to evade the seemingly bleak future we are rushing blindly towards is to first grow the quality of consciousness individually, and if we do that, it will grow and come together collectively. But it has to work in that order. You have to develop it individually, and then the collective is just the sum of all the individuals. You cannot expect the collectively to put out an edict or something that tells everybody they need to grow up and have that mean anything. So basically, where it has to start, how we're going to evolve beyond it, starts with our own individual growth, not with a better scheme of how we can rearrange the chairs on the deck of the Titanic, how we can make a better set of rules and a better set of laws. Those are good things to do, but if we really want to solve the problem, we need to start with individually improving the quality of our consciousness. That will do more than anything. Secondly, we need to educate as many people as possible to what the problems and potential solutions are. And then lastly, hope that great change can happen without great pain to energize it. But I'd say look on the bright side. History and a long-term view are on our side. There have been many seemingly impossible dark moments in history, and all of them eventually righted themselves if given enough time. Now, the bad news here is that, if given enough time, maybe quite a bit longer than our lifetime. The good news is that that's all right. This is just a lifetime. We'll have more. History will say that it will right itself. So that's kind of the big picture on that. We'll go into more detail, I guess, on the similar subjects in later questions.
Okay, well, thanks. It's a bit of an introduction for us. In economics, one of the guiding tenets is that each economic unit, be it a person, a household, a firm, a corporation, or even a conglomerate, is acting in its best interest, and greed frequently gets in the way. In competing rather than cooperating, it's said to create or generate the most good for the most number for the whole. If cooperation would generate a greater total output, why hasn't it shown up as the primary facilitation mode?
Good question, and that opens up a lot of discussion here. First of all, that, quote, guiding tenet of capitalist theory is an incomplete statement. It's missing some of its qualifying assumptions. The theory of Adam Smith's invisible hand only works well if the population defining the economic system is, and that's all of those economic units are, intelligent, rationally driven, well-informed, focused on sustainable long-term goals, and finally, these economic units must always be able to act in their own best interest, free of imposed coercion, within an environment of fair and open competition. Okay. Now, all of these qualifying assumptions that I just gave, as I recall in my economics class, were explicitly noted. I'm not sure if it was by Adam Smith or by the people who, worked with and furthered his work, but I'm thinking that it probably was by Adam Smith himself. He said that, these are assumptions that his invisible hand was based on. And if they're not explicit assumptions, then they are definitely implicit assumptions. That is, assumptions that were made when he was working out his invisible hand theory, which is the fundamental basis of capitalism. Implicit assumptions means he made the assumption without really intellectually making the case for that assumption. It was just there but not talked about. In any case, that only works if you have these things. These assumptions are fulfilled. Obviously, if people, let's say, are short-term focused, then the best thing to do in a short term is perhaps rob banks. But we know robbing banks isn't going to help this system. It doesn't have a sustainable long-term goal. If people are not free of imposed coercion, then the system doesn't work. How can you have competition when there's coercion, or the competition isn't fair, or it's biased? The guy who's the big guy in that particular economic sector just flat out, burns the buildings down to the people who are the little people trying to break in. You see, that's not fair and open competition. So we have all these things. The system just won't work. The invisible hand doesn't move around invisibly fixing wrongs and righting rights unless the people are intelligent. They have to make rational decisions. If they're making random decisions, the system doesn't work. If they're not well informed, then competition doesn't help. The buyers are supposed to move to the better source for the better product. Well, if the buyers are tricked by marketers and not well informed and information is kept from them, then how can you have a fair and open competition? So you see, we have all of these things. The other, I guess, was focused on sustainable long-term goals. If your goals are short-term, like how much you can get out immediately, like I say, that's robbing banks. If they're not sustainable, if your company's not sustainable, then your company's going to go out of business, which means that's not intelligent or rationally driven. I'm going to have a company, I'm going to grab a lot of money, and I'm going to run. Well, that's not what Adam Smith's invisible hand was. He didn't That wasn't part of his plan to have those kinds of attitudes. So you see, there are all these qualifying assumptions that underlie Adam Smith's invisible hand, that underlie a theory of capitalism. Okay, well, Adam Smith's economic system has never been implemented for want of a system populated by intelligent, rationally driven, well-informed economic units focused on sustainable long-term goals. That has never happened, and it's never been implemented for one of a fair and free competition without coercion. That's never happened. Whenever you have power, you have people willing to use that power to make sure that competition is not fair and free, but in their favor instead. And coercion, well, that's what power's all about, right? He who has power can coerce others to do what he wants, and generally does. So this system of capitalism has never actually been tried. It's never been implemented. And we'll talk more a little bit more later about ways that it has been implemented. How has it been propped up, fixed, and what it has done. And when it comes to cooperative, I have to say, don't confuse cooperative system with collective systems such as socialism or communism. They are not cooperative systems. They simply replace industry with more government. So that's not what generally we call collective systems, which are typically socialism or communism, is not at all what I mean by a cooperative system. Cooperation within a group or system is defined as actions and interactions that are free of externally imposed coercion of any sort. Well, that makes sense. If you're coerced, that's not exactly you cooperating, is it? You're doing what you're made to do. You can hardly call that cooperation. Cooperation has to be freely given, or it's not cooperation. And the second part is, it not only has to be free, but it has to lower the entropy of the system in the long term. Okay, so a cooperative system has to be free, people to cooperate, and it has to lower the entropy of that economic system in the long term. Now, think about what lowering entropy means. You can if you lower the entropy for yourself, in other words, you're selfish, like in the first one, Adam Smith's, if it's self-motivated, and you lower entropy for self, then that lowers the entropy of the system. That's good. But if you help other lower their entropy, then you help lower the entropy for the system as well. And if the system has its entropy lowered, then that's good for the system, and the system will then kind of feed back to make self and other more likely to succeed in lowering entropy further. So it all builds on itself, you see. So a cooperative system will only work well if the individual economic units and the whole system optimize or evolve themselves together simultaneously. This implies that every individual is committed to and is free to do whatever he thinks is best for himself and for the system. Okay, now here again, it is assumed that individuals are intelligent, rationally driven, well-informed. In a cooperative system, a focus on sustainable long-term goals that are compatible with individual goals is assured because a bigger picture, holistic view is forced by the system's perspective. In a cooperative system, the whole is simply a collection of individuals. Okay? Thus, the success of the whole requires an optimization of the success of each individual. This logically implies that individuals succeed best by helping others as well as helping themselves, and that there is never a conflict between self-interest and system interest, since the driving ethic is to optimize both together. We have been conditioned to think of collective economic systems as a tyranny of the majority because, given the general low level of consciousness quality and given populations that are apathetic, irrationally driven, fear-driven, poorly informed, and focused on unsustainable short-term goals, tyranny is the likely result. Tyranny is tyranny and generates an oppressive, unstable system no matter who or what is in charge.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. There's a lot of people that I've had conversations with along economic topics, and they do get confused regarding cooperation versus collective, and the tyranny of the small minority, the ruling party, the central planners, and how they would wish to take things that benefit them are truly what concern many of those individuals that I've had conversations with, but it does require cooperation in order for the system that is the economic entity as a whole to be able to function, because if it's not, it's really truly fighting itself the whole way, and that doesn't reduce entropy.
Yes, exactly. So we're not talking about this idea of collective. It, like I say, it doesn't matter who's in charge, whether it's a single dictator or a committee. If there's tyranny, it's tyranny, and that is oppressive and not good for anybody's economics. Now, I said that a free market or the capitalist system, Adam Smith's system, has never actually been tried. Well, it's true here too. A cooperative economic system has never been implemented for one of a system populated by cooperative units that are all intelligent, rationally driven, well-informed, and are both committed and free to do whatever they individually think is best for both themselves and for the system. So again, this is hypothetical. It doesn't actually happen. Now, no decent approximation of either concept has ever been tried on a large scale, although the second, cooperation, can be and has been implemented within very small communities, like a close-knit nuclear family, a local farm or food cooperative, or perhaps even an Amish village. So we have some cooperative systems that we can study and look at, but they're all very small systems. Okay. The major difference between the two is that Adam Smith's units are focused on optimizing self-interest, while cooperative units are focused on optimizing both self-interest and system interest simultaneously. The latter, because of the bigger picture, it includes the former plus has a bigger picture, rightly sees that if you can't have one without the other, you have a problem. You see, you can't have one without the other. So if you have self-interest and the system goes to hell, well, then your economic system goes to hell, and all the self-interest isn't really going to bail you out. If you have only system interest and not self-interest, then yourself gets lost, and you become a kind of a cog in that system, is what we were talking about before. So it doesn't really work if you can't have both. If you have one without the other, it doesn't work very well. Now, there's some interesting logical consequences. Adam Smith's vision of capitalism is not suitable to small-scale economic systems. And until recently, cooperative economic systems were not suited to large-scale implementation. I'm defining long-term profitability. This is the problem with the scale for the cooperative systems that are large. The problem is defining long-term profitability as a function of individual input. See, that's very difficult to do. So now with computers and sensors and communication systems that talk from everywhere to everywhere instantaneously and internets, that becomes a more doable structure. Before it was just impossible. Cooperative systems were local, small systems, period. Also, capitalism grows up outside of a central government, while cooperative systems need no central government, since all are knowledgeably and intelligently committed to enhance themselves, others, and the whole. Okay, so they don't need a central government. With some success, capitalistic systems have tried to meet capitalism's qualifying assumptions, i.e., restrain the effects of populations that are apathetic, irrational, fear-driven, poorly informed, focused on unsustainable short-term goals, etc., by instituting self-regulation. That failed for obvious reasons. In self-regulated systems, cheaters always eventually win. Then the government laws and regulations were tried. Okay, you couldn't do it yourself, so now we're going to have the government try to regulate the capitalism. That hasn't worked well in the long term, since it is proven impossible to keep industry wealth from eventually subverting government regulatory power due to the same defective, dysfunctional population providing their unevolved, low quality of consciousness attitudes to both the economic and government systems. However, please take note, if the regulation fails to compensate for the dysfunctional characteristics of both sectors, economic and government, then the system becomes unstable. All systems with an out-of-balance distribution of power are unstable. When the rules are made by a few for a few, whether it's totalitarian, dictatorship, capitalist, socialist, communist, whatever it is, when the rules are made by a few for a few, the result sows the seeds of its own destruction. Those who would grab more and more power and control inevitably destroy the natural source of that power. In other words, they kill the goose that lays the golden egg. A polarized system, we'll just say lords and serfs, is unstable. A historical lesson that is lost on those lusting for more and more power and control is that a polarized system is unstable. We have seen hundreds of these systems come and go, and we will no doubt see more until we grow up as individuals. This is the only type of system we can create. It is the perfect reflection of us. Economic systems reflect our personal systems, reflect the systems that we run in our homes and in our offices and businesses. That's just the way we are. So in summary, I'd say thus far, one would conclude that cooperative economic systems do work very well on a very small scale, and that Adam Smith's system can work also very reasonably on a large scale if properly regulated and subdued by law. That is the function of law. The whole reason we have law is to subdue the expressions of our low quality of consciousness, and that concept is no less applicable to economic systems than it is to civil systems. A big if that, given the quality of consciousness, has yet been shown to be feasible within PMR as we know it. See, that's a real big if. We don't know whether or not a capitalist system is feasible within PMR as we know it. We'd have to grow up a lot first. Now, perhaps regulation will work and law, but so far, we've always seen that power, as they say, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. When enough power accumulates, then that government industry regulation barrier breaks down and you end up with an unstable system.
Thanks, Tom. Really appreciate you helping provide clarity around this topic, in particular for those people that get confused.
Well, it's a whole new paradigm, this idea of a cooperative system. It's not, when you say that, people immediately think, oh, that's where the committee tells everybody else what to do. Well, that's not cooperation. If you're doing what you're doing because you've been told to do it, you're not cooperating in the way I mean it. You're just obeying, and there's a big difference. Cooperation requires freedom, a free will to decide whether that's what you want to do or not.
Yep, absolutely. Shifting gears a little bit now, stepping away from the economic and more to the political social. At times I'm hopeful the rational evidence that the entropy increasing effect of war will have become clear, that it's bad and that it's wasteful, and that we as a planetary species have learned that lesson. While large-scale conflicts haven't emerged in recent decades, resource misallocation continues to occur. Fear is the driver of this. At least to me, it's fairly obvious. Where is the exit from the loop of fear, weapons development, hostility, destruction, fear, weapons development, as that loop continues onward?
Okay, well, the off-ramp starts here with us. The only off-ramp is a gradual accumulation of individual growth. Until then, we will do no more than rearrange the political and economic furniture. Now, what I just said sets the upper limit. Okay, that's as good as it can get. If we're just going to fix symptoms, we'll do no more than rearrange the political and economic furniture. Okay, it could get worse than that. We could actually, de-evolve, and instead of individual growth, we could have individual de-evolution, and then everything would get even worse. But it starts with us. We have to individually do it. Now, we can improve the systems. Let's say we improve the regulation and we improve the laws. That will help a lot. Okay, so we can make some improvements in the structure of the system. But you get a system that degenerates past a certain point, improvements become very difficult, because the very people who have to make the improvements are people who are benefiting by the lack of those improvements. It's very hard to get people to make decisions to limit their own wealth, power, and influence. So it's one of those things that if it gets past the tipping point, and I said there were lots of tipping points here, and economics is one of them. If it gets past a certain point, then it's very, very hard to bring that back from the brink of self-destruction, because that's what will happen. As soon as it gets so out of balance, then it will begin to self-destruct. It'll begin to eat away at its own power base. It'll begin to destroy what makes it work. And eventually, of course, the underclass will have enough, and you will end up with a change that is usually violent and often not effective. And then you start out and do it again. Okay, that's the downside. And hopefully we won't have to go there. But we are near the tipping point. And if we don't make significant changes in the near future, which means over the next decade or two, we may have to go through another cycle of pain and misery before we emerge back again on the other side, decades later or centuries later. It's hard to say.
I don't want to live in fear, because clearly that helps push myself as well as my reflection of everybody else back down to that lower level, and I don't want to go there, but it is my concern. And hopefully, yes, there will not be the greed and ego as it presents itself through the political leadership that will take us down that way, and we can avoid redoing that loop once again.
Yeah, if you fear it, you just help it. You feed it. That's not helpful. Now you can work against it, and you can speak out, and you can try to educate, but fear is not helpful at all. You need to realize that what we say, stuff happens, and we get to deal with it. If you take that attitude, then you do what you can, and when stuff happens, you deal with it. Deal with it however you have to, and that's life. And you do that as cheerfully and as happily as you can. So that's kind of the idea. It's not that, oh no, this is awful. We need to, set aside some water and we can live out of our basement if we have to, and start, we need some guns, and all that sort of fear process. That just makes everything worse. It's better to be reasonable, be prudent, but don't fear. Just do what you can, and make good decisions when you get to the point to make decisions.
And hopefully help promote the positive alternatives instead of the destructive negative route. In the discussion in the Ultimate Social Network video, you talked about the process fractal. For those that haven't heard of it, please do go see that video. Tom does a wonderful job in explaining that. As I summarize it and as I processed it, the process fractal is the evolutionary force, and consciousness is the media that it is acting upon. A beginning state of the consciousness is improved by the evolutionary force, resulting in an increased consciousness, which is the input source then for the next evolutionary change, improving the level of consciousness. It's a never-ending improvement, yet sometimes setbacks do occur. The media hasn't changed, the consciousness. So is it a setback from the process fractal that results in a misevolutionary change, or is it the portion of the unevolved media, since it doesn't evolve uniformly, that drags back the rest of the media?
Okay. The impact of setbacks is mostly felt in, and significant to, local reality frames. So setbacks tend to be in local virtual realities. Okay, thus local de-evolution does not necessarily drag the system down enough to create a system issue. The system is huge, and any particular reality frame is relatively tiny, but they do all add up. It's not that the unevolved media drags us or the system down so much as it's simply not carrying its fair share of the evolutionary load by evolving progressively. Okay, now locally, unevolved consciousness can drag down more evolved consciousness. But remember, the larger consciousness system is aware, intelligent, and in charge of everything, including the delete, reset, rewind, and reprogramming buttons. If the system were actually threatened, now the big system, the larger consciousness system would no doubt take action to reset the system back to a point where the probability of system success was larger, and then let it go on again from there. You see, this is a digital system. Digital systems are wonderfully flexible. Okay, between natural randomness and more informed nudging at key points, it would be a whole new ball game, like cutting off a lame arm so a new healthy one would grow back. So the system is probably not ever going to be at risk or permanent risk. Now, local subsystems like in PMR, yes, we can see de-evolution and it can get very painful. Eventually, it'll come back out that other side because, the bad stuff is not stable. It's self-destroying. The bad stuff ends up shooting itself in the foot and eventually does go away, and you get another opportunity at the good stuff. And if it turns bad, well, it shoots itself in the foot. You get another opportunity for the good stuff. And we've been doing that historically as far back as we have historical records. I mean, look at the history. We have any number of governments and organizations that rise up, get abusive, crash. They're unstable. Something else grows up, gets abusive, crash. And that's been going on for thousands of years. One day we'll grow up and something will come up and not be abusive and continue. That's the way of evolution. It doesn't get rejected. We build on it from then on, and then we build on it. And that then is that's process fractal working for us. If we find something that works, we just keep feeding that back into this evolution machine, and out comes new forms of it that are better than the old forms.
Can I ask a clarifying question in that area, please? I seem to recall from some of your earlier works that there are a multitude of different processes working, that evolution of the big system, big C consciousness, as it progresses, it doesn't always do things right. And so it could be that we unfortunately end up into an adverse attempt at an evolution working on our consciousness. And so could you speak to that side of it? I think you kind of touched on it.
Your consciousness system is not a perfect system, just like it's not an infinite system. It just is a system, and it has evolved through this evolution consciousness process fractal to be what it is today. Now, the more it evolves, the better it gets at evolution. The better it does. It's like a positive gain process. It keeps getting better and better. Now, that doesn't mean, though, that it's perfect. And I make that point that it's an imperfect system. It can make mistakes. It has rules, and the rules can be violated. And sometimes the violators get away with it. Most of the time they do not, but sometimes they do. So it's just, we have to understand that it's just a natural system. It's not infinite. It's not all-knowing in the sense that every little detail is programmed and kept up with. It's a big, probabilistic, natural, finite system that is not perfect, but by now it has evolved to be very, very, very smart. Okay, to begin with, it wasn't all that clever. It was sort of clever like the first couple of 1 or 2 celled animals were in the primordial sea back a few billion years ago here on our planet. It was pretty dull, but it has, with this process fractal, created consciousness as we know it. And it is not likely at this point to create any major errors that would then create big problems for anyone. When I say it's not perfect, I basically mean that it doesn't, every process and every detail isn't studied to make just the perfect move. A lot of times moves are made just because the system kind of projects that that would be a good move. But as it may turn out, that's maybe not the best move. But stuff happens and we deal with it. So take that not so good move and we deal with it, and that's okay. It's not a big deal. It's a very recoverable, very flexible system. And the fact that it makes errors is not a problem. It's just like we make errors. We're making these choices and our stuff, and we make an error. We fly off the handle, we get angry, we say things we don't mean. Well, then we go out and buy some flowers, and we try to fix it up the best we can, and we learn something, and we don't do that anymore. Next time we hold our tongue because we realize we say things that we will regret because it's all ego and fear. So that's the way the system is. It's not perfect, but it's learning and it's growing, and it has been evolving so long and has grown so much that it doesn't make very many big errors, if any. Most of its errors now are in the details. Part of the way it works is that it's just statistically driven. So if things look like it's a higher probability that this is good, then it'll do that, even though just because it's a higher probability doesn't mean it will actually work out that way. It was just a better probability. So it's got those kinds of errors in it, if you will. The point is the system's not a perfect system. It's not an infinite system, so it has to deal with real stuff, and real stuff always has its flaws.
And tail events do occur, something that's outside or near the very fringe edges of probability.
Yep, and they do. The system deals with them, as best it can, but none of those are, they don't occur very often, and mostly they're not that hard to deal with.
So to wrap the conversation on a lighter note, one of the hidden pearls of wisdom from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies is a line that's attributed to Captain Jack Sparrow. The problem is not the problem. The problem is your attitude about the problem. Do you understand? And
yeah, that's good.
Do you agree with that? And if so, without coming across as a pirate to those around us, how can we help to spread this message in a love-based way?
Well, that's a very good way of putting it, and it's something that comes up over and over again. See, we have people who are aware that our learning lab here has a lot of issues and a lot of problems, and that our economic system has problems, and that our political system has problems, and that the world, not just ours, but the whole world's has a lot of these problems. And then they have a choice. They can set a lot of tires on fire, in the middle of a busy intersection to get attention, write nasty letters. They can make a lot of noise. They can take people hostage. They can do all sorts of things. I guess some of them get to the point where they murder. You kill abortion doctors, or, murder people who, are wearing fur coats and, eat meat, whatever. We have this kind of attitudes that you can't just sit here and watch it happen. You got to go do something. You got to go fight it. You got to get rid of those people who are the problems. You got to, that is a failed, wrong attitude. That's the problem's not the problem. The problem is your attitude about the problem. That's an attitude of, I know best. I'm going to force it to be the way I want it. I'm going to make it be my way, and I'm going to do what I can to force it to do that. That generally just makes the system you're trying to change dig deeper in to its commitments and its belief. It doesn't help. It makes things worse. Violence and force are never, well, I shouldn't say that. I should never use never and always, but are rarely a good tool. Mostly they are dysfunctional tools that make things worse rather than better. So what can you do if you're not going to, wave a flag and get up on the ramparts and throw stones? Well, you need to first do as Gandhi said, be the change that you want to see in the world. You have to change. If you're angry and want things to be the way you want it, then it's really hard for you to fault other people who are angry and want things to be the way they want it. It's just a reflection of yourself. In fact, that's why those people are like that, because they're just like you. They have a different set of beliefs, though, than you do, but they're just like you. And in a sense, you could say, well, those two deserve each other, but none of us deserve that. So the point is, be the change you'd like to see. Change yourself. That's the only thing that you have responsibility to change, and that's yourself. If you change yourself, you will help the whole system change. And I know people would say, that's silly. If I change myself, okay, what if I become a sweet guy and love everything and a nice? The system's just going to be as mean as ever. It's not the case. You've just helped the system entropy go down a little bit. You're a good example. People see what living a life of love does. It encourages others to do it. You talk to people, you educate them, you explain problems to you, not how to make a bomb. You don't explain that, but you explain why love is the better answer, why fighting fire with fire just makes a bigger fire. And if you do that, you will be 100 times more effective than if you shake your hand, swear and fuss, and make a big fuss of it. Work quietly, fix yourself, become part of the inside. As long as you're an outsider, the people on the inside in the system, the them that we don't like, these people won't pay any attention to you if you're an outsider. Now, they may not pay much attention to you as an insider, but they'll pay a lot more. You have a lot more access and a lot more influence as an insider. If you think Wall Street needs to be reorganized and made more fair, then go join Wall Street and work for that as an insider. Don't say, they're the evil people, I'll never join them. You see, that's not helpful. An insider who has bigger thoughts and better vision is 100 times more valuable to fixing the system than, outsiders who have what they think is a better idea and a bigger vision. So these are things that you can actually do that help, as opposed to the railing and the fussing and the waving the flag and writing diatribes and spreading more fear and more angst and making the whole problem worse while you think you're trying to make the problem better. But you're not really trying to make the problem better. You're just trying to vent your angst and fuss and make a lot of noise because it makes you feel better. You know you're ineffective, but it makes you feel better, and it gives you a sense of power because you can start a big fire or make a big fuss. Then you do that for your own fears and own self-centered reasons. It's not really because you want to make things better as it is that you want to change things, because power changes things. And if you're not changing things and you're powerless and you have a fear about being powerless, so you get out there and change stuff, that's not helpful either. So that is very, very true. The problem isn't the problem. The problem is your attitude about the problem. If your attitude about the problem is something that makes the problem worse, then you're part of the problem. You are feeding the problem. You're growing the problem. If your attitude about the problem is one of accepting that that's the way it is, and then working intelligently to educate people about it and to work on changing it from the inside, then you're a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. So I agree very much with Captain Jack, and I say that we need to think very long and hard of which one of those categories we fit in our efforts to fix them and fix the system. Are we really part of the solution, or are we part of the problem?
Tom, thank you. Thank you so much. Chipper has been inspired during the course of our long discussion over this time period, and he's written a poem that he'd like to read for you.
Tom, I was listening to your interview on primal man and primal woman, and sometimes when I listen to you, it sounds like this. A standard deviation, plus and minus. Relationships get loaded up with cargo brought on board uncupped, stuck in some comforted hold, needing more than being bold. Attracted by these pheromones that saturate these living bones and bring to bear a focus of so many things, sometimes like love. Polarities that play by rules as they bring about love's motioned school, intentions ringing as it swells into these forms that sound like bells. Dotted cells inviolate, uncontoured is procreated, set in balances exceeding fine, comprehensive chorus lines. Painting blank canvas deep in pain, further crusting self-wrought brains, stuck hand to brush that fondly writes the same steps out as if not yet trite. Blindly unfocused at the point, life sees this dive as not some joint where maudlin ego makes sipping drinks in a cornered chat with how it thinks. A tango starting very slow, progressing more the more skins shown, speeding up on that tempoed climb, confused by movement's urgent line. To shatter all the records laid as if to stage honors parade below pride's glitter-mirrored ball in smug satisfaction's hobbled crawl, unrecognized as parting ways, encapsulating improvised days on lonely shuffled dusty roads, unperturbed by curiosity's goad. Set to within inhering force, flowing along cohering course, a ship relates to how the turns of rudders held release unearned enmity, unmitigated, a giving that incorporates and more completely integrates. I give from heart inflamed in mirth this touching that has given birth to its own conscious spiraled tip, brought fully into love's held grip, and still in silence's cleared sphere, resounding peals of laughtered fear that has no place in this now's here. Quality of frequency informationally set free within and spherically unbreached, encompassed in a human heart, in focus of the other's part, a sliding in such harmony, found fully as shared quality. Namaste.
That was very nice. I'm impressed. How could you pull all that together while still listening?
It's a transcription bug in my programming, I think. But it's something that has developed itself as I have striven to describe what it feels like growing, what it feels like living, and that's as close as I can come. It's the output of what it sounds like to be inside my ears.
Mm-hmm. Neat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chipper. Before we close, Tom, would you tell us a little bit about the books that you have, what's going on, any symposiums that you're offering to those people that follow you?
Sure. Those people are listening to this who want to know more, have an interest. There's several places you can go. One, of course, would be my website, which is www.mybigtoe.com. There you will be able to buy books, but if you really don't want to buy a book, you can go to Google Books and you can read it there for free. Otherwise, you could go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any bookstore, and if they don't have it, you can always order it. So it's available pretty much out there in all the usual ways. You go to my website, and there's a forum there. And on that forum, there's lots of discussion and lots of very smart people who have been talking about this and thinking about it for a long time, very knowledgeable. And that would be a good place to either just read. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of posts there on every subject imaginable. And that would be a good place to find out more of your specific questions. Otherwise, for general information, go to YouTube. And YouTube, you could type in my YouTube ID, which would be TWCJR44, or you can just type in Tom Campbell, or you could probably just type in My Big Toe, and you will be able to get it pretty quickly. Or you can go to Google and Google Tom Campbell or My Big Toe, and they will show you lots of places that you can go. But the YouTube station is nice, or I guess channel is what they call it, is very nice because I have all of the workshops and all of the interviews that I've done go up on YouTube. And they're there available for everyone for free. One of the best ones, if you want a good summary of the ideas here and get a good understanding of the theory as well as the practice of how to apply it would be the Calgary workshop. And it came in a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Basically just a few hours on Friday intro, and then Saturday is the theory and Sunday is the application. So if you go there, you will get perhaps more than you really want, but still it's a good overall view of what I'm all about and what my theories are. You'll get more of the science there because I deal with the science more in my lectures than I do in my books, because the books are really targeted to a very general audience. And the workshops are people who are already interested or they wouldn't be there. If you want more of the science, find it at YouTube. You can find it on YouTube, and you can find it at MBT Events. That's the third place to go. MBTEvents.com are the people that do my organization, my scheduling. They put the things up on YouTube for me, and they schedule where I go and when I go there. So that is a good site to find out what's happening in the near future. Well, that's about it. So I urge everyone to look into more detail, because in an interview like this, it's very difficult to give you enough detail to answer even your most fundamental questions. It's kind of a quick pass over the top of a lot of very interesting ideas, but there's really not a lot of time for deriving the answers that I give. I just state them, and that's that. You kind of have to take it at words value, and that's sometimes not good enough for a lot of people. They'd like to see, well, why did he say that? Where did that come from? Well, you'll find it on YouTube and in the books.
This has been a very informative and enlightening conversation with Tom Campbell. Thank you so much for spending the time with us and helping to explain the bigger picture related to your view of your big toe. On behalf of SkyBlue Symposia, thank you for sharing your perspective with us. We hope the listeners have gained as much from listening as we've gained by enabling your voice to be heard. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you very much, Dave, and everybody, all of you. I've enjoyed it very much. It's been fun, as always, and we'll have to do it again.
Looking forward to the next time.